Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're at the bottom of page 1334. Aleph Shin Lamed Daled. And the continuing discussion of the sweetening of the Gevurahs from within, the third level of sweetening Gevurah. Which led us into the discussion on the pasuk by Yemer Hashem Hine Mokem Iti, how God reveals the Yud Gimel Midas Harachimim, the 13 attributes of compassion to Moshe Rabbeinu, explaining what Mokem is, what Sur, that he'll stand on the rock, all referring to the Rishimu, the root of all of existence, which is rooted in the Helam Ha'atzmi, which is the root of the 13 attributes of compassion. And that causes the transformation of Zdenis to Zochius, sins to merits. So as he said in the previous paragraph, in Nitzavta Latzur, is that when the Eibishter wanted to reveal the 13 attributes, 13 divine attributes of compassion, of mercy, he said, Nitzavta Latzur, Sur is Butzina de Kardanisa. Keep that in mind because he's going to refer to it again later, which we called either the strong flame or the strong spark, nitzutz chazak, or the dark spark. But either way, it's Gevurah's the Atik. It's coming from Gevurah's of Atik, which manifests in Meiches Tema, which is the source of the 13 strands, the Yud Gimel Tikkun Dikun, the Yud Gimel Midas Harachim. So now came the question to understand this, and also to understand why they called Rachamim, Yud Gimel Midas Harachimim, since they are in a state of Tzimtzumim, like Cyrus, like thin strands of hair, as we discussed yesterday, is a very narrow, a very limited flow. Whereas Rachamim, V'sheidish HaMshachas is from Tzur, which is Gevurah. So why they called Rachamim, and these are Rachamim Pshutim. Rachamim, compassion in general, is a flow, and Rachamim Pshutim means a seamless flow. Or Rachamim Pshutim means not limited, not defined Rachamim, but completely Pshutim, meaning without any boundaries. So to explain this, the Rebbe Rashab went into two meanings, opposite meanings of Gevurah, and then in the parentheses he said, in truth, they're interdependent. So what are the two meanings in Gevurah? One is Gevurah is Tzimtzum, like we just said, Tzimtzumim, limit, constraint, concealment, Heder Hashpa, the lack of Hashpa, lack of transmission, refraining from transmitting, like when we speak about a Isha Gevurah, a person who's a person of Gevurah, which means really, sometimes you say Isha Gevurah is an angry person, but here Isha Gevurah means a very strict person. That would be a good word. So Kamsim B'Tivei, he's very strict. He's in nature stingy and strict, without being mashpiyah to another. The opposite of a good and kind person, whose whole personality is to be mashpiyah, is to give. And from this comes kas v'reges, rage and anger, or anger and rage. He's filled with din v'reges, which is all a level of Gevurah and strength and severity. And as I said, what did I say? Isha Gevurah. Like, how did I just translated it myself. I got how I translated. I thought I came up with a good word. Okay. Isha Gevurah. I said a strict person. Okay. The second interpretation, Gevurah, is the opposite. Loshen Tagbeirus, intensity. Another strength, but the other way around, a strength of an intense flow. Adrab Tagbeirus Hashefa, that the flow is more intense even than it is from Chesed. And he gives the example between a Chaya and a Behema, between cattle and essentially aggressive animals. So we see that there's a big difference in how their energy flow, if you wish, their chayas, their I don't want to say vitality, their life force, their passion. Behema, that comes from chsadim, and that's why even when it comes down below, it's klipas nega, like we said, it's kosher. chesed, that all the 10 types of behemoths are all chesed. So we see a certain type of kridus, which means cool. Kridus is like a coolness, a certain calm. So it walks with a certain calm without an aggressive movements. The Ein Zerizus Klal, without speed. It's not running, it's not rushing, it's not, and all its movements, eating, drinking, are all ba'atzus gdela, very relaxed. Atzus really means lazy, but he means more relaxed, very relaxed. Why? Because the chayis in this animal is b'tzimtzum amiyut. So the chayis, which is like the gevurah, the strength is b'tzimtzum amiyut. So even though an animal is strong, rav tvuz b'kayach sher, but in the chayis, you don't see it in its movements and it's in its behavior. Like water, which is cool in nature, and there's a certain heaviness, so the water rushes from top down. Chaya, on the other hand, which is more of an aggressive animal, animals that are non-domesticated, that not docile, like the cattle, they come from Gevurah. Aryeh, a lion, is the gematria Gevurah, and elsewhere it seems that when you say Aryeh miyamin, pnei Aryeh miyamin, that even though the face of the lion on the right, it means Gevurah and klei chesed. It's still Gevurah, but it's in the container filtered through chesed. And in the Maimon, in Aveda, it's like the inverted, what do we say, chesem seal. Now, in contrast to the docile animal, the docile cattle, the aggressive animals, they move quickly, they run quickly, and all their movements, like their desire to hunt and eat, is bislavas gedela. It doesn't say hunt, to eat, is with great passion. Because they have chayes gadol, being that they come from the level of gvuras. So now he's explaining how gvura now is, instead of being limited, gvura is actually more intense. And that's why wild animals or undomesticated animals, aggressive animals, are much more powerful. The intense energy is much more intense. The energy is much more intense. So let's continue from where we left off, because he's in the middle of this. So I'm the fourth line from the bottom. This is from Meir Ibn Gabai, classic Kabbalistic work. The fourth section, chapter 19. Al Pasuk u'metecha dmus arba chayes. There he explains the Merkavas Yecheskel, the chariot in the vision of Yecheskel, who saw the vision of the four faces I mentioned, that he mentioned before. Pnei Aryeh, the face of the lion, Pnei Sher, the ox, Pnei Nesher of the eagle, and Pnei Adam. So there he says, u'metecha dmus arba chayes. In the image that he saw, within it he saw a image, a likeness of four animals, chayes, but the word there is chayes. So he writes in Avedis HaKodesh, Kosav, B'zel Shene, and this is the exact expression, his exact language. V'krois chayes, why are they called chayes? Al reiv his neitzus sa'er, due to the intense, or to expand the reiv, a large amount of of sparking light. In other words, it's an intense and multitude of sparkling light, of energy. Because all the light that sparkles, meaning it's not dimmed, it's not subdued. The means like a fiery and sparkling fire, and does not slow down, it does not quiet down. That's called chai. And that's why it calls them the chayes, HaKodesh, the chayes. That's why they're called chayes, because they're very much alive. At kan l'shene. So he actually quoted that at kan l'shene means, up to here is the quote. Hare. What do we see from this? So in this second interpretation, we see Gevurah is the opposite of the first interpretation. Here, the hashpah that from Gevurah comes an abundant, an increased level of transmission, not a diminished level. It's more than chesed. In the first interpretation, like the Isha Gevurah, he's a strict person and is not mashpia, stingy, holds back, refrains from being mashpia. Here, Gevurah is actually intense hashpah. Like we learned, discussed, it was explained earlier about Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Where was that? Okay, that we'll have to look up. I remember something, I don't remember where it was. Okay. And now the Rebbe Rashab continues with this in this line of thinking. Ukamoi is going to give more examples and more explanation in this Gevurah, the intensity of Gevurah as an intense flow. Ukamoi ki adam hu nefesh. So the pasuk says, Parsha A, says where it says the Isser, the prohibition of eating blood. So he says ki adam hu nefesh, because blood is the life. Is life liquid, basically. It's the life source, life force. What that means is that as opposed to, let's say, when you eat a piece of food, so the food is also a source of sustenance, and the food will break down and then be digested and eliminate waste, and ultimately will become part of a person's blood. But the blood itself is the very life liquid, the liquid that carries life through our arteries and our veins. So the pasuk calls it damu nefesh, and therefore you shouldn't eat dam because that is the nefesh, and that's a thing that is what he calls teva, something that we should not. And the explanation is why that's the case. But what do you see? The ikar achayis ba'odam hu b'shasa gidim, the primary energy force, life force, I should say, in a human being is not in the limbs and the organs. The limbs and the organs is what defines life. But what is the life force is in the 365 veins. It's in the 365 channels. Shemispashtim gide hadam bitmidus lo yanuchu. That extend the gide adam, the veins of blood are constantly flowing. Lo yanuchu, they never rest. Thank God. In other words, it's a constant bubbly flow of blood that gives us life all the time. If, God forbid, there's an impediment or the blood slows down, lower blood pressure is not healthy. So the damu nefesh, which Dam he's going to say is Gevurah, is all about a rushing, a continuous flow, an intense continuous flow. And that's the primary vitality and energy in a person. From there comes the power and the strength. And that is from there we gain the movement and the speed and the zrizus, meaning the movement and the there's a word, not speed. I don't want to use the word zizus as in speed. The quick. There's a word like there's an English word for it. Not alacrity. What is it? When something is constantly in a forward motion, constantly in motion. Quickness. Maybe that's the word. Movement and quickness. Be'ivarim, in the limbs of the body. Lefi eifin tagberes achayis shebedam ha'ivarim. Imrav ima'at. In other words, when the blood is rushing intensely, the entire body, like you see, when a person is running, the blood goes up. So basically, based on the flow of the blood, the more the flow, the more intense is the energy within him, and the quicker the movements. So what do you see from this? That Gevurah is connected, again, with Tagbeirus Achayis, with an intensity of flow. So he gave an example first of animals and in contrast to cattle. Now he's talking in a human being as well. Even though we don't have the same type of energy like in animals, but nevertheless, within the human being is this dam, this Gevurah. Now it's interesting, he doesn't call the dam Gevurah, even though dam is Gevurah, he just says, Mehem HaKoyach VaGevurah. Yeah, okay. Ukamoy kain, and so too, hu b'hashpos haseichel. Give me another demonstration of this. In the hashpa, like you say below in the footnote, haseichel. When seichel is transmitted, intelligence is transmitted, the kasher bo bedibur dafke hu beribu achayis. So when a person is thinking an idea, concentrating an idea, they can be immersed in it, but there's a certain element of passion. You see that when it comes into speech, when a person's speaking, that's where you see Ribei Achayis, you see his slavas, you see the passion and the fiery dimension. The moyach hachachma, because the chachma, the moyach, the cognitive faculty of chachma, moyach hachachma, the power ukar, is cold, aloof. It's much calmer. The einanika b'achayis kol kach, and you don't see there so much the passion. It's much calmer. Ukishmashpia seichel ala zulus b'krirus. And when a person now transmits the seichel to another, also in a calm and cool demeanor, kamoishehu mitzad seichel, like it is due to the seichel itself, like he says, moyach hachach mekad, eina eshi spailas v'chayis ba'zulas. In other words, if you were to speak to someone exactly the way you understand it within yourself, generally speaking, on that it would be far more cool and collected, calm and collected, and wouldn't cause a spilus, an excitement, and a passion in the other. Only when the expression comes in speech, in words that come from the heart. In other words, you're adding a whole passion from the heart. Shu you say that eish, and the heart is based on the element of fire, heart, passion, fiery passion. Then you actually impact, and it enters the heart of the other. So, in other words, seichel itself, take away the emotional way of expressing it in a passionate speech, is much more calm and collected and cool. And if you express it that way, you have teachers that speak very calmly, very intelligently. Everything they say is brilliant, all accurate. We're not talking about someone who doesn't understand. They understand very well, but their style is a very cool, calm style. And usually that does not impact someone the same way as when it's expressed with the Nivvarman Hayetzim and Alev, where the ideas are also now being, you're experiencing, you see the passion of the teacher or the speaker. And that passion reaches into the heart, which comes from Eish, fire, Gevurah, reaches into the heart of the Zulas, of the other. And even though in this passionate delivery of speech, we're not mechadash anything. There's no new idea that was conveyed. Nevertheless, when the seichel, the cool seichel, this cool intellect, comes out from is filtered or channeled through the hevel, the cavity of Yosei Eish in the heart, in the fiery passion of the heart, that causes an excitement and an energy and a chayis, a passion in the other. You enliven him in the hashpa, through this transmission, you're energizing the other. So you see from this, again, an element of Gevurah is more intense than when it's coming just from the cool chesed of the water of the mind itself. The Eish of the heart, which is the Gevurah, adds this intensity increasingly. And finally, in the parentheses, he's going to explain what it is in Avodah. And so too in Avodah, serving God. The Ava Kamayim, there's a thing called Ava Kamayim, and we know Ava Kirish Be'esh. There's a love that's more like water. It's calm and peaceful. It's love, but it's far calmer. The Ava Kamayim, Afilu Mebchinasiriya de Chachma. Even if it's coming from a high level, like the visualization of Chachma, where you visualize an idea, so the clarity is there. Eine Mishane Tivoi. That does not change the personality, the nature of the person. Rak b'chinas ave k'rish be'esh. Only a love that comes like the fiery flames, the passionate love that comes from Eish, hu Hashem ishtana tivei. That causes a change in the person. So in other words, the avos Hashem that a person has, that's more calm, that comes from a deep contemplation in godliness. Even Riyah of Chachmah is going to cause a connection and a love, but the love is not going to be one that really fundamentally changes him. So just like said before, how a speaker or a teacher affects another, so when it's coming from Seichel alone, it doesn't have such an effect. When it comes with the passion of fire of the heart, it has that effect. So too within ourselves. And our love of Mayim is calmer and doesn't really change and affect you. When it's passionate with fire, it changes the personality, the nature of the person. Like he says in L'kutei Teira in the Maimon, this is a shlach. The first discourse, it discusses that there. Sometimes the difference between love Kamayim and love with fire is the difference between the love of siblings and the love of a spouse. So siblings, there's a love, but you don't see a passion in it necessarily. It's almost like it's a biological love that comes from the connection you have, and it's there. We're not talking about in any emergency situation or threatened situation. It's a calm love. It's like the love of water. It flows, it's always consistent, and so on. With a stranger who becomes your spouse, there's a passionate element. There's a very deep passion. You could also have Ava Kamayim, but there's Ava Ka'esh that's burning and passionate. And that causes fundamentally more change because of the passion. Okay, so all this came to explain that there are two levels, two interpretations in Gevurah. One, and they're opposites. One is Tzimtzum, limit and constraint, and a limited flow or a lack of a flow altogether. And the other is the opposite. It's an intensity of flow, with all the different demonstrations that he gave for this. So before we continue, let's stop if anybody wants to clarify anything, ask anything. Obviously, we're not finished the subject because we still have to get back to Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim and the Tzur. So that's going to be the next few pages. So just be patient. It's going to take a few more pages till we really get back to all of it. But it's all building the case for Gevurah. But remember, this is not a tangent. This is all very fundamental to the whole transformation of Gevurah, to transformation of sweetening the Gevurah, not through Chesed, but within. It's all connected to it. So we'll soon see how it all comes together in the Rebbe Rashab's inimitable style. Read on. Then he continues now. New paragraph, page 1335. Should have mentioned before, if you want to follow the text, just go to ayinbeis.com. We have PDFs of all these pages. Okay. So on 1335, the next paragraph. Now, there's an additional difference between chesed, chsadim, kindness, and gvuras and severities. So we just saw the difference he spoke here about chesed and gvura, chesed being calm, chesed being more docile, less fiery and passionate, and gvura being far more intense. So he's going to speak about another difference. Shebechsadim lo yisesev davar be'efanam shachase. That nechsadim, which is hashpa, we know it's a hashpa amshacha. You're transmitting something, but nothing is added. Be'efanam shachase. In the manner of way it transmits, it doesn't add anything to the actual transmission. The way it originates in the source, in the source, that's how it arrives into the makabel. Like, for example, water. Water from a pitcher is the same water as it comes into the cup. Like water that, this is a Lashon Chazal that he brought before. Water runs from above, from top down, from a higher place to a lower place. Nothing changes. As they go down, nothing is added. From the way it was before it descended. In other words, the way the water was, let's say, on the top of the mountain, is the same way the water is down of a waterfall, the same way the water is at the bottom of the waterfall. Nothing changed. And the same thing, b'amshachas haseichel. V'chein b'amshachas haseichel memokad haseichel. Yi amshachase b'midei lo yigara v'lo yesef. So this is, he gave an example of physical water. Same thing when you transmit seichel, intelligence, from the source of seichel. So the hamshacha is the same measure, not lo yigara, it's not missing and it's not adding. Not more and not less from the way it is from the source. Now, I know you could say, 1 second, what about when a teacher is employing Gevurah to create a tzimtzum so you can explain the idea to the students, so then something is diminished. So firstly, he's not talking about Gevurah here, he's talking about chesed. Chesed on its own is just a flow. It's a flow. And there's no filters and no regulators and nothing. It's just a flow. The way it is here, that's how it is here. So if you don't employ tzimtzum and midah, tzimtzum, Gevurah, or anything, that's how it is. Like we both ways, Gevurah both in limiting or Gevurah in intensifying. Chesed on its own. Ukiyadua, as it's known, the bekoyach hamaskil yeshir mugbal shemaskil be'efen kazeh dafke v'lei be'efen acher. Let me read it, the whole line, and I'll explain. Uv'yeshir mugbal kama sheyuchel haskil ba'in kama shekoser b'makamach. Okay. Let me translate first of all. In the koyach hamaskil, which is like the collective, the power of intelligence, not the intelligence itself, but the place where intelligence, like you said, mokara seichel. Where does intelligence come from? Koyach hamaskil, like just like vision comes from koyach hariyah, the power to see, the faculty and power to see, and then there's the actual sight, which is the vision itself. So seichel is the actual seichel, and it comes from koyach hamaskil. So everything, every faculty has the actualization of the faculty and the power of the faculty. So even when you're asleep, or even or even if God forbid a part of the organ or the limb is somewhat injured, the koyach is not injured. The koyach is always there. So the koyach hamaskil, he says like this, that even though you may think that the koyach hamaskil is completely amorphous and has no shape and form, it's just like, think of it like a shapeless source of intelligence. He says no. It's the koyach hamaskil has a tzir mugbal. He's answering essentially a question. You could say, what are you saying to me? That like water, the flow, as it comes down, it's exactly the way it was in its source. By seichel, it's not that way. You could say in the source, it's a different quality, it's a different type of seichel. It's on a different higher level. So what do you say for mokar seichel? If you were saying seichel hagoli from the teacher or from the mashpia, from the beginning of his hashpah, if he doesn't employ gevurah, it comes to the student. That's one thing. But you're saying more than that. You said that by seichel, the mokar seichel. The mokar seichel is a different state, seemingly, than the seichel itself. So he's saying that even the koyach hamaskil, the source of seichel, has a tzir mugbal, has some personality, has some tzir mugbal. Literally means some defined image, some defined structure. Shemaskil be'efen kazeh. This person was born with a certain personality. His koyach hamaskil has a certain way of thinking, a certain way of conceiving ideas. Dafke. V'loi be'efen acher. That's why you could have two people who are two intelligent people, but their koyach hamaskil is different. In other words, it's structured differently. V'yesh shir mugbal, and it's all. In addition to that, there's also shir mugbal. There's a limited measure. Kama sheyuchel haskil ba'inyan. How much capacity he has. Like some people's koyach hamaskil has a lot more capacity. Like they have like, you know, just like some people are physically stronger and their muscles have more capacity, the same thing in seichel. So there's two things here. The seichel has some structure, some personality to it, even before it's beginning to flow. Just like you see somebody, as a child, you may not recognize it, but they grow older, you see they have a certain way of understanding things. There's things that come from training that we acquire. here is Pashtus, he's speaking about more natural, not what's acquired, but that which is more inherent. In addition to that, there's how much that can flow from it. So what does that tell us? That even the Koyach HaMaskil, even the Makir, has a definition. So as it flows in the form of Chesed, nothing doesn't change dramatically. In other words, when it comes into actual Seichel, it's not going to change from the way, the personality of the type of the way that person conceives of ideas. Okay, that's Chesed. Ukasher ba l'dibur. This is the pure seichel as it comes from the source into the seichel of the person. But then, like he said before, kasher ba l'dibur, when the seichel now comes into expression in speech, yisraba shafa seichel har b'yesra al midase. Something happens to the seichel. The flow of the intelligence gets increased much more than what it was in its initial parameters, amidose, on the initial measure and parameters that it was there in the pure seichel. Like you see, when a person speaks, he doesn't say it gets deeper. He just says the shefa, the flow becomes more expansive. Ukanira b'chush, like we actually see, the bashpa, the dibur, that when a person is bashpa with speech, kasher ashpa b'chayis pnimi, miyaseda esha belev. Going back to what he said earlier, when the ashpa is coming, when he says their speech, he's clearly qualified. We're not talking about every time someone speaks is going to be more. It's going to increase. There's some people speak and actually it's nonsense what they say, or it doesn't add anything. Here he's saying when the ashpa is with chayis pnimi, with an inner vitality, an inner dynamic energy, miyaseda esha belev, from the element of fire, from the yesod, the foundational element of fire in the heart. And we're not talking about over excitement. You know, some people start yelling and screaming and being overly dramatic. Then it could actually be false. It could be like someone acting, someone masquerading, something that's not real. In other words, he's talking about a passion that's accurately that's true, not a fake. Not ispilus to say that we see too much excitement, too much dramatics, then it could possible that's not even true. So when you see this type of chayis primim, you say there's a misesef. In contrast to the regular flow of chesed, what he said that nothing is added, now you see misesef is chachus be'er asechel. Something is innovated within the Eira Seichel, within the energy of the intelligence, Mashallah Yoda Mekadem Klal. So he's adding not just passion, that something actually new is added in the idea that was not known before. So an expression in speech, and this is known when the Rabbeim would deliver a maimer, or in general, when an intelligent person expresses themselves, very often when you speak, you'll hear a speaker will say, when I spoke, I realized something came out that I didn't realize before when I just thought about it. So even though on one hand, the idea came from within the mind and within the intellect and the cognitive, but when it's expressed in this way with this passion, and it's a healthy, we're talking about not overextended, not over excitement, but something that is real, then something is chadish that he did not know before at all. Mashallah yoda mekedem klal. Because a new energy was transmitted from its source. In other words, Chezer came into play here. So when the flow came from the seichel initially, so like we said, the way it is in its source, that's the way it emanates and flows. But when you add now, you say the eish, the passion, that comes through speech, a true pnimistic chayis vitality that the person is expressing, it reaches deeper than the source of the seichel itself, which came from Ur Yashar. Remember, we learned about Ur Yashar is the direct light. This is the light that comes like Ur Chayzer, that comes from the passion that reaches deeper than the regular natural koyach hamaskil, like it says elsewhere, as was explained also earlier. Yeah, I remember that as well. I don't remember where, but I remember a while back he spoke about the chodosh that comes when you go to Abba ve'Ima Eloyin, and they elevate to a deeper level. The chazer goes all the way up. When the midas catapult the seichel all the way to gaze at Arich and Atik, at the forehead of Arich and Atik, that dafka draws a chazer. That I remember. And a few other places where he discussed that. I'll look it up later where that is. Okay. I'm going to stop and if anybody wants to ask anything. The only thing I'm wondering, when he said oid yesh hefresh, isn't this what he just said, what he said earlier? What's the oid? Why is this an additional difference? He said before that chesed is the additional point is this. He didn't say earlier that something was added. Earlier he said it's more passionate and therefore more ribui chayis, and has a more impact on the person, the listener, or on you. It's mishtana. It causes more excitement. Here, what he's adding, the oid yesh hefresh, is that not only is it causing more excitement in the person when you speak with that passionate fire of Gevurah, but it also adds some new idea that was not there. That's the oid yesh hefresh. Lo yisesav David, that before nothing was added, and in Chesed, in Chesed nothing is added, and in Gevurah something is added, something new is added. In addition to the excitement, an actual new idea can come into play when a person expresses it this way. That's the addition that he added here. Now, it didn't finish yet, but I'll just stop here just to pause if anybody wants to ask anything. Hare, so he continues, Hare, so we see from all this, Shebebchinas HaGevurah dafke tisraba hashefa. That dafke from Gevurah, the shefa, the flow, gets increased, causes the increasing flow, mepnei shebebchinas tagbeirus hashpa. Because Gevurah creates an intensity of the transmission, both what he said earlier about more excitable, more energy, more vitality, but now also adding more, reaching even to a deeper, something new is added that was not there in the original transmission if it was just coming from Chesed. Well, Lechein, Gamkein, and due to this, there's another thing. From Gevurah, you'll have a hashpah that is unlimited. What that means is that the hashpah will never cease, will never desist. From chsadim alone, from kindness alone, the hashpah will not be unlimited in that sense. And as it extends with a long extension, like when the chesed is coming and being mashpia lamata, so it's traveling a long way. In other words, it's an extensive transmission. Being that chesed on its own, without Gevurah, does not have the power on Gevurah in the transmission, so therefore it will weaken. So where does it get stronger? It's only when there's also the intensity of Gevurah that the chesed will flow unlimited and will also come down all the way below. As we learned earlier, that it's interdependent. If it flows incessantly, without any desisting, without stopping, it goes all the way lamata mata. This for sure was discussed earlier. I believe this was on page, if I recall, Aleph Shin Hey maybe. Let me see. That's where he spoke very explicitly. Yeah. No, not Alf Shinhei. Sorry, later. Or earlier. 1 second. Earlier. Okay. He said it here. He spoke about Yaakov and Esau. He said, on page 1289. On 1289, he said, when a person is the Isha Tev B'Tivei, meaning he's a naturally good person, but he's cool, Kar B'Tivei. He said, a kalter mensch, kalter blut. He's cool, calm, and collected. So as much as chesed as he has, I just want to see the actual language. So yichla koyach tuve v'chizde miyad. So good, he's a kind person, but since he doesn't have that drive, that passionate drive of the fire of Gevurah, the Gevurah in chesed, like he explains there, so it will also cease. The cholshu isha chesed b'tagberes gdela. Zeh mitzachu ish cham b'retichas adamim b'chol inyana ba'ein hesed mensch zude geblut. Someone who's a far more passionate person, he'll come and his giving, his pleasure in giving will be far more passionate. That's why Alkein Yeir Er Chazde B'Tagberes Dela Bli Hefsek Klal V'Lo Yichla Keiche LaElam. It will not pause or cease and will never end. V'Lo Yanuach V'Yishket Asher Yasas Atei B'Pel. He will do everything possible to continue giving that good. This bottom line is there's a similar idea. What we learned there is what we're learning here. But here the point is much more the intensity of Gevurah. So now we've learned three differences between Gevurah and Chesed so far. The first is the intensity, the vitality, like the Chaya, and that energy. The second is that it causes much more excitement, like in Dibur. The third is that it actually adds and increases something new. And the fourth, actually, I should say, is now the bligvul, that it's an incessant flow that does not cease. So that's actually four things I think I could point out here. Fine. All in the second interpretation of Gevurah, not the first. This is all the tagberus, the intensity. Ukamay behelada. Ukamay behelada, what does he say now? Like when you give birth, Shehim B'chinas HaGevurah, Helada comes from the power, from the level of Gevurah. Let's see what he means by that. That can mean several things. That in order to give birth, you need a special power of Gevurah, or does he mean like Ein Kishe Ela Ladas, that you need that that you need an intensity from the parents, both of them having more intense energy, not positive. So what he means?
I think what it is, when a woman gives birth, when the actual birth, when it comes to the last few minutes, they tell the lady, push, push, push.
Yeah. I don't know if that's what it means. Maybe. I think it means more the power from either the parents or from above, because look what he says now. So he said that so since it's coming from Gevurah, that's why birth is perpetual. The power of birth, it creates generations after generations ad infinitum, forever. So I don't think it's just the push of the woman pushing the baby out is causing that. I think he means the actual koyach haleda, the koyach hamoy. I have to look into it a bit more, where it says maybe in other Maimorim what means up. But bottom line is he's just demonstrating the blig gvul that comes from Gevurah, from an intensity. Later is intent. Later could also be intensity, simply like I said before. Birth requires an extra force, an extra power from above. So it's not just the regular run of mill of things, run of the mill. Okay. Okay, reading on. And so too, the descent of the soul down below into the body, the guf gashmi, in the physical body, which is completely disparate and completely infinitely as ein berech klal. There's nothing commensurate about the neshama as it is above to the way it comes down. So how does it come down? You need an intense strength and power to bring the neshama down to the bottom, down below. Bring an interesting raya, proof. This is the same raya the Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya, chapter 2, that is coming from the Pnimius, Chelik Elakam Ma'amam, is coming from the innermost part of godliness. Here he's bringing it in the context that Vayipach requires strength. When you speak or you just breathe, you don't need to put any special. Vayipach means the man the nofach meteche nofach bekeach dafke. That's someone who blows, someone who's blowing into someone. When you blow hard, that's coming from strength, from intensity, from Gevurah. Why? Because the neshama needs Gevurah to get inside of a body. Because the body and the soul are such opposites, they're antithetical to each other. So you need to actually blow it into the body. That's what he's saying. So Taka Gevurah is coming from a deeper part of the one that's Vayipach, that's doing the blowing, that is doing the blowing. And dafka, through this strength, this extra strength, is the descent and the transmission of the soul all the way down below to the lowest levels. I like that. That's very interesting visualization. Now I go back to Leda. I think it's the same idea, that in order for birth, you need a special strength, you need a special bracha, blessing. Yeah, I think that's what he means by Mekayach HaGevurah. Or it could be, you're right also, that it also manifests the very physical act of giving birth requires a lot of strength. And also the parents need to be in an intense place in order to do what they have to do in order to give birth. And maybe it's all the above. Probably all the above makes sense. In other words, it's not just, like I said, just like here, when you're breathing or just speaking regularly, you don't need to put any extra thrust. But when it comes to certain special things, you want something accomplished, like giving birth or a soul coming into a body, you need extra thrust, you need extra power. That's essentially what he's saying here. So chesed alone is just a flow. And Gevurah creates that intensity, that creates that extra thrust, that extra push, and so on. The Chein Masha Kosav, the Rebbe's Rashab is not over with this. It says in Tehillim, Yimesh Nesei Behem Shivim Shana, that your years will be 70 years. V'im begvuras b'shmeinim shana. Gvuras. And if with strength, some gvuras, it'll be 80 years. What do you see from this? That Gevurah creates more life, more years, longevity. Even the iflik, expression in the Gemara. Once he's already gone to a certain point, meaning he's had the strength to get here, he'll continue. So Gevurah has the power, is power to create, to push things forward, to make things grow, to make things, what he said, bligvul and all the way lamata mata. Hare, the ribui, hashefa, habiltu mugbelas, umebchinas hagvuras dafka. So from this we see that the abundant flow without limit is coming dafka from Gevurah. Gevurah is creating this intensity. Very different than the first interpretation in Gevurah. So all this is the second interpretation. Keep that in mind because we're going to need to know that as we go further. Okay. Any questions? I think we'll stop here because now he's going to say, V'hine yesh oid hefresh. he's going to bring another difference between chsadim and gvuras. The Rebbe Rashab is doing what he does so well. He's kiyada melech hateva alav. What's the expression? That he's just really extending himself and just giving us everything. I see. It's like opening the floodgates. Huh?
Kiyad Hashem hateva olav.
Right. Kiyad Hashem hateva alav. That this is like just opening the floodgates. It's quite. I think this is a perfect expression of Gevurah and Chesed. The Rebbe Rashab's Ayin Beis. It just doesn't end. It's relentless. So anyway, it's interesting to witness. So there's going to be another difference between Gevurah and Chesed, Gvuras. But we'll stop here. Anybody want to ask anything? I think it's quite clear so far, so good, right? Yeah. Okay, well.
This all is in the Gevurah Chasadim, not the Isha Gevurah.
No, this is the second pirush. Yeah, in Tagberes Achayis, Hashefa, not in Gevurah Tzimtzum, right? For sure, it's clear. He says it beferish. Yeah, because look, remember his question was, why is Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, which is Grachim Pshutim, rooted in Gevurah? So the answer is being built here, because Gevurah has also the second taich, not just Tzimtzum. The interesting is the Habah Talia. How is the first taich dependent on this? I think the answer is going to be because it's so intense. That's why it needs to go through a tzimtzum when it comes down below. But we'll see. I don't want to. I'm doing what I always say not to do: speculate. So I don't want to speculate. But it just seems obvious. But we'll see. Okay. So just to give you the lay of the land, we're at the bottom of page 1335. We'll stop here. He continues explaining Gevurah and Chesed, and then let's see here. In the middle of next page, I think. Let me see. Not sure yet. On the top of page 1337, basically another page, he's going to go back to Gevurah the Atik. Gevurah is the Atik, which takes us back to V'nitzavta al Atzur. And the whole pasha with Moshe Rabbeinu and Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. Yeah. And then he continues. On page 1338, he's going to continue the psukim in Kisisa. Yeah. He's going to continue those verses and explaining the revelation of the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. I gave a long introduction on that for that reason. Wow. Okay. It's very thorough, very comprehensive, and it's moving along.
Rabbi Jacobson, I have a question. In the aspect of creating Gevurah, creating a new, energy, would it be fair to say in Avodah that it's redirecting the passion, and by redirecting it, you essentially are creating a new energy or new path? In other words, if I'm about to do something that I'm passionate about that's not so great, but I redirect that energy and I use it towards godliness, I'm in a sense not just redirecting but creating a new energy. Would that be fair to say?
It's fair to say on its own. I don't know if that's what it means here. Here he spoke about that Gevurah creates a spiralus and it affects the person, it changes him. Maybe in the parentheses where he said Mishtana Tivai, that his nature is changed. I don't know if when a person, like when you're speaking with passion, with true passion, and a new idea comes to you in the concept, it's due to redirecting. I'm not sure if that would be the way I would explain it. Can you explain it? Perhaps, but I don't know if I'd limit it to that. So what you're saying is I think accurate. The question is that's the intention here. See what I'm saying?
I understand. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we're stopping here close to the bottom of page 1335. I'm just amazed at Rebbe Rashab's clarity and his consciousness, flow of consciousness, and how he's able to put it in writing. This is all written in the first draft. That's the thing. It's amazing. It's like he just has this flow. It's quite something to see.
I think it's important to say that Gevurah itself could be very negative. When it comes with Chesed, Tikvuyas HaShefa, Tikvuyas HaChasodim, it's another type of a Chesed, the Tikvuyas in the Chasodim. If you're not
listen, remember, he spoke earlier about the worst type of Gevurahs Koshes, of the Satan, of the story with Eov, the Bnei Elikim. And so we talked about Gevurah is of Esav, is the source of the worst possible things in world, severities. He's talking here Gevurah Slamaila, as they are Koyach Eliki. Keep that in mind. We're not talking about how it evolves. It ultimately can evolve into the lowest darkness, which is ultimately where we're going. That even the darkest of the dark, Kal Shebakalim and Evdim Beretz Ashur, they too are going to be touched by the Hela Ma'atzmi. But he's talking here how it is obviously above in the source. But it's correct to say, Gevurah. Well, we'll talk about this more a lot more. Here he's going deeper, not just that Gevurah is dependent on Chesed, but that in Gevurah itself, there's the Koyach HaAtzmi, the Koyach HaHela Ma'atzmi. That's the real Chiddush here. It's one thing to say Gevurah needs Chesed to sweeten it, and to nullify or neutralize, or to override it and transform it. But another is to say the Gevurah itself can ultimately be transformed. That's really where he's going here. Okay, we're stopping here at the bottom of 32.